Alright, welcome back everyone to PyBrain. And so if you saw our last video on lists and for loop, today's video is going to be focusing on while loops. So let's get started. So as usual, I'm here in the command line. I'm on Linux. Make sure you are able to follow along with either a Mac or Windows using any kind of programming environment of your choice. PyCharm is a very good one for Windows, and for Mac you could essentially do the same things I'm doing. Alright, so let's get started. So I'm just gonna go into a directory called programs. So as you can see here, I have some example programs. So we're gonna make a new file, and for that I'll type nano for the editor, and the file we want to make in this case is gonna be usually when you pick a name, make sure it sounds relevant to whatever it is. And so in this case, we're going to be going over while loops. So how about we call it while loop example and .py. So all Python files will end with an extension of .py. And we press enter. So now we're in the editor. And so now we could go over exactly what are while loops. So in Python, a while loop is defined as a type of data flow method by which you could iterate over a certain number of times, which depends on some condition. So let's do an example here. So let's say that we have a variable, let's say count is, let's say it's 0. So we have this variable named count. It's equal to 0. And then we'll set up the while loop. So the while loop always begins with the keyword while. And then we have this condition here. I'll put it in parentheses. It doesn't need to be in parentheses, but I'll just put it in parentheses to kind of show that we need something in here. It has to be a boolean, which, remember, a boolean is true or false. And so the while loop will only execute if this boolean value is true. If it is false, it will not execute. And so let's say that our condition is going to be count less than 100 or less than 10. I'll keep it simple here. Okay, so let's say that within this while loop, every time it runs, we're going to print hello world. And then we're going to add, we're going to say count is now equal to count plus 1. Okay, so why, you might ask, why do we write, okay, these 2 lines of code that I just wrote? So let's explain this. So essentially, within the while loop, we're going to print hello world to the screen, and then in the next line, count equals count plus 1, we're basically saying add 1 to the variable count. And so now the new value of count is its old value plus 1. And so if we're in the first loop, so count's going to be 0. So then 0 is less than 10. That's true. So then we're going to execute printing hello world to the screen. And then we're going to say count is equal to 0 plus 1. So now count is 1. So in the next step, we'll jump back up here to the beginning of the while loop, and we're going to say, okay, count is now equal to 1. 1 is less than 10. That's true. So we're going to execute printing hello world one more time. And now we're going to say count is equal to 1 plus 1, which is 2. And I think you get the point. So as we do this, we'll end up with, I believe we'll end up with 10 prints of hello world, because at some point count will be equal to 10. Once count is equal to 10, this statement here is no longer true, because 10 is not less than 10. So once that becomes false, then the while loop will quit executing, and essentially that's when the while loop stops. Okay, so this is a pretty simple while loop example, and I think it illustrates the point pretty well. So let's save this with Control O and then Control X to exit. And so now we're back out of the program, and now we could execute the program by typing Python space, and I'll just type in the first few letters of the program name and press tab. And so once I press tab, it auto completes the whole name for me. That's one of the benefits if you're on Linux or Mac. With Windows, you could also execute directly from PyCharm if you're using PyCharm, which is pretty simple as well. Well, anyway, so now I press enter to run the program, and you can see that we printed hello world. So that's 1 time, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, yeah, so I was right. So we print 10 times, and then after the 10th time, of course, count is now equal to 10. 10 is not less than 10, and so the while loop stops at that point. So you might be wondering, so if you were wondering at the beginning why we have count, that's to keep track of which loop we're in, and that is needed because we need to stop the loop at some point. If I didn't have this line, it could cause some serious issues. Okay, I don't think I want to run that actually on my computer because I fear it might crash it, I don't know, and I'm making a video, so I don't want to risk it. You might want to try it on your computer at your own risk, but just to let you know, it could crash your computer. It all depends, because sometimes programs, when they have non-stop loops, like while loops that are non-stop. In fact, I could create a non-stop while loop 2 ways here. So one of them is commenting this line out, because now we're printing hello world, and count, you could see here, is equal to 0. And because we're not updating the value of count will always be less than 10. And so essentially, this hello world will print infinite times, which we know that's impossible, right? But the point is, it's going to print so many times that it might cause issues with your computer's memory, and that could cause the computer to freeze up, which we will have to reboot. So let me get rid of this. I could also create a endless while loop by just typing in here inside this parentheses, typing in true. So if I type in true right there, the Python's gonna read this, and it's gonna say, while true, run this loop forever. And so essentially our count variable is going to keep going towards infinity, and we're going to have hello world being printed forever, infinite times. if that makes any sense. Also, true, as we mentioned, is a Boolean. True is defined as the value 1. And so if I also put here while 1, print hello world, and count equals count plus 1. So also this will cause a infinite loop. So I just want to warn you guys, about what possible things you could, how you could achieve these undesirable events. But essentially, you always want to stop the loop at some point, so you have to provide a condition. In our case here, our condition is going to be this statement here. And so we also have to take into account that we want to increment that value of count by 1 each time the loop runs. Okay, so just to summarize for loops. So a for loop is started with a word for. Here we could say any value of variable. I'll say I. That's the conventional variable for loops. For I in range, let's say 10. Print. I'll print the same thing, which is hello world. Let's call this one while loop, and this one for loop, so that when the program is executed, we could see which of these statements came from which loop. The nice thing about the for loop is that the number of times that it's going to run are predefined here, while in the while loop, the number of times that it's going to run have to do with the condition which are set up before the while loop and within the while loop. In this case, it depends on the value count. So really depends which loop you want to use for your purposes. For loops are, I believe, are a little bit more popular because usually we want to run our code. We want to run some block of code a predefined number of times. But while loops are also useful in cases where you don't know how many times you want to run it, but as long as a condition is true, you want it to run. Okay, so anyway, we're gonna go ahead and print out or run this code again and see what kind of output we get. Okay, so you can see here we get hello world printed about 20 times in total. We could see which ones came from the while loop, which ones came from the for loop. So that's a nice example right there. If we go back to the code, you can see both of these loops achieve the same result essentially. For loops have less code, obviously just 2 lines. While loop requires, you can see here, 4 lines of code, so double the lines of code. But really it depends on what you want to use it for. And later in this tutorial series, I will show you guys how we could use these in some fun projects. So yeah, so on our next episode, I hope to make a video on how to utilize all the different stuff we've talked about. We've gone over data types and also loops, which are actually very important. If statements as well are very important. So I hope you subscribe and like the video. Alright, well, thank you everyone, and I hope to see you in the next video.